Shalom, everyone. This is Aaron Lipkin, and this is the fourth session about the Nexus, the sites where the Israelites, the ancient Israelites, encountered God. And I'm honored to host Dr. Jeffrey Hudon today. We will be speaking about one of my favorite sites, and I know I'm saying it about every single site that was presented in this course, but actually Bethel has a very special spot in my soft spot in my heart, and I'll tell you why. This is a personal testimony. I moved to Samaria in the year 2000, and I didn't know exactly where I was going into. I just wanted a nice community, a religious community, and live in the countryside and not in the city. I did not know what I was going into. And we moved in August of 2000, and in September of 2000, the second Intifada started, and Israel was basically on flames. It was a terrible time, and we had so many terror attacks all over Israel, but in Judea and Samaria as well. So for a few years, I didn't really have the opportunity to understand where I was living, what's around me. And I remember one day after the second Intifada ended, I drove in a car, and I took a hitchhiker, a Bible scholar from my town, Ofra. And as we were passing near the Arab village of Bitin, the scholar said, "Aaron, you know what happened here?" And I said, "What happened here? Was there a terror attack?" And he said, "No, no, no. Do you hear about the story of Jacob's dream of the ladder? It happened right here." And he pointed out at a certain structure just beside the road. And for me, that was the first time that I connected the place where I was living to the biblical stories around me. And from that point on, it's been ongoing and just growing and growing and growing. So Bet El is the beginning. Bet El is where I started, and I'm so excited to attend this session today and hear Dr. Jeffrey's explanations about this site. So I will present Dr. Jeffrey. Jeffrey P. Hudon holds the PhD in Near Eastern Archaeology and Old Testament exegesis from Andrews University, and currently serves as the administrative director of the Khirbet Safra excavation project in Jordan, working at the site of biblical Sibma. He and his wife resided in Jerusalem for 2 years, where he earned an MA in biblical history at Jerusalem University College and learned songs in Hebrew. He also holds an MA in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary and has 15 seasons of field excavation experience at sites in Jordan and Israel. He teaches at Andrews University, Bet El University, and Grace College in adjunct roles. So without further ado, Dr. Jeffrey, the microphone is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aaron, for this opportunity. And thank you all for attending. And it's a delight to speak with you and to interact with you later on. And as Aaron mentioned, I lived for 2 years in Jerusalem. And I can relate what he's saying about driving by Bet El and thinking, wow, this happened here. Because the whole land of Israel in my first graduate experience was my classroom. And we would study the archaeology of Israel and the archaeology of Jerusalem in the morning. And in the afternoon, we would either be walking or on a bus going to those sites and seeing them and walking the terrain. And there's no greater experience than to actually have tangible connections with the land of the Bible. And it's a thrill to experience that. I spend most of my summer in the Holy Land every year, and so it is my second home, and I love it dearly. I love its people, and just delighted to share this. What we're looking at here in the first slide is Burj Beitin, which is east of the Tel, the ancient site of Bethel, Beitin. And it is a Byzantine structure, a part of a church or chapel that commemorates events from the period of the Patriarchs. So it's not at the site, it's east of the site a little bit, but a very nice photo nonetheless. Okay. All right, now here we come to our map, and I just wanted to show this map. It's a map of the modern map of the area. And do I hit new share, Aaron, or can you guys see that? Can you see the, okay. I can't, so I'm kind of at a disadvantage here. But if you can look north of Ramallah, you should be able to see just to the east of the main road, the route of the Patriarchs, is a village called Beitin, Baytin. It's a misspeller's paradise when you transliterate Semitic words into English, but spelled different ways. But that is the site of ancient Bethel. Now, just north of that, you'll see a high point, and I'm not sure how it's spelled there, but Aratas is one of the renderings, and we're going to talk about that as well. It's actually pointing north towards Samaria or Shomron, the heart of the West Bank. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can move this ahead. There we go. Okay. All right. The site of Bethel in the biblical text, there is no site mentioned in Scripture as many times as Bethel. Last count was 669 references about, and that is surpassed only by Jerusalem. Okay, and so it's a very important site, but just by the amount of times it's mentioned in the Bible. The site, which we're going to again unpack here in a little while, the site of Bethel is mostly recognized as Beitin. You can see it's spelled differently here. And Beitin again is about 10.5 miles, or I think 17 kilometers north of Jerusalem. Okay. It is strategically located. It is a Tel site. It's on a hill to the east of the road, and it overlooks, controls a very strong spring, and also controls a crossroads. So you've got the north-south, or what we call the route of the Patriarchs, going from all the way from Beersheba north, past Jerusalem, and then into the Dothan Valley, where it ends and hooks up with the International Coastal Highway, or the Way of the Sea, but also east and west, an east-west route going out to the coast and then down to the Jordan Valley. And these are much more rare. You don't have a whole lot of east-west routes coming up and going down from the hill country, because it's so rugged. And so it is an important strategic site. First mentioned in Scripture is Abraham, or at that time Abram, built an altar to the Lord east of Bethel and west of Ai, and then returned after his Egyptian sojourn to the general vicinity. Okay, and of course, as Aaron was talking, one of the most important events concerning Bethel is Jacob's camping at Bethel and dreaming of this ladder with angels descending and ascending. And because of that, he erected an altar and pillar and named the site Beth El, or House of God. Okay, and he has more dreams when he's in Haran, getting Rebecca. He returns and erects another pillar, or we would say masivah, a standing stone, and calls the place House of God. Okay, House of God. Now, Bethel has another name. We're going to unpack this a little later as well, named Luz. So this is common in the Old Testament, where you have ancient Semitic names that are changed when a new people group, i.e. here the Israelites, move in and change the name. It was a royal Canaanite city with a king. And ironically, you read the book of Joshua, it doesn't specifically say the Israelites conquered and destroyed Bethel. Now, there is evidence of a late bronze destruction during the time of the Exodus, time of the conquest. But it talks about Bethel in Joshua 8 in relation to the attack on Ai to the east. And so there are it does mention the king of Bethel was conquered and taken over. So we assume that happened, but there's no clear details in scripture that there was any kind of warfare or any siege or violence regarding taking over the site of Bethel. Okay, after Bethel became part of the 12 tribes, the 12 the allotments of all the tribes, it initially fell to Benjamin, but then passed in control of the tribe to the north, house of Joseph, the Ephraimites. And it became, again, like it's earlier on when the city was had such a good location, of not only defensible, but a very strategic location, it became a border site. And border site facing to the south, facing Jerusalem. And the border description, which we won't get into today, actually went along the shoulder of the hill that Bethel's on, the Ketef. And so it was right on the border. And that's significant too for geopolitical and religious reasons, as we'll see. Okay. It served as a sanctuary during the settlement, the period of the judges. The Ark of the Covenant stayed at Bethel for a while before it went to Shiloh, excuse me. So there is not only just because Jacob named it Beit El, there is a history here of religious activity at the site. And this probably predates perhaps even the Israelite settlement period. Now, the big topic today is Jeroboam the first Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who successfully rebelled against Jeroboam and the Davidic king that followed Solomon's son. And he established Bethel as the major religious center of the northern kingdom. And he did this to rival Jerusalem. And this is, again, right after the schism, which is around 930 BC. And it became, and again, we'll unpack this, basically counterfeit religious pilgrimage site in place of Jerusalem for the northern tribes. Now, if you remember your biblical history, right after the schism, right after the break after Solomon's death, when the 10 northern tribes broke away from the 2 southern tribes, you have some warfare. And Abijah and Asa actually invaded, encroached, I should say, more better term, into the northern kingdom and took over Bethel for a short period of time. So it came under the control of the southern kingdom for a short period of time. And this was kind of a ebb and flow. The northern kingdom came down and conquered Geba and Ramah, the hometown of Samuel. And that put a huge issue with Judah, because Ramah, like Bethel, controlled an east-west route and the north-south route. So there was no roads coming into Jerusalem. You entered, or you came, if you came up from the coast, you came into Jerusalem via the north. And controlling Ramah broke that connection. So Judah had to do something. And so they did. It was finally stabilized at Mitzpah and Geba, but they did for a while control Bethel. Now, moving ahead to the 8th century, the prophet Amos, Hosea talks about it too, but the prophet Amos, again, is called by God. He lives in Tekoa, which is southeast of Bethlehem in Judah, and he is called by God to go to Bethel, to the northern kingdom, and give these oracles at this shrine, at this religious center. And again, Amos gives these oracles against the nations, all the foreign nations surrounding Israel and Judah, and everybody's cheering him on. This is great. He's proclaiming judgment of Yahweh against these peoples. And the seventh judgment falls upon what? It falls upon Judah, his own home. And everybody's, high-fiving and everything's great. And they think it's over because, again, things are done in groups of 7. This is a biblical number. He's done, right? No, he's not. He has an unforeseen, unexpected 8th judgment, 8th oracle against Israel itself. And so Amaziah, the priest at Bethel, basically tells him, get out of here. Get out of here. And again, this is done, we date Amos around 750, it could be slightly later. But as you know, by 732, Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrians come in and take Bethel, and just the rump kingdom around Samaria itself is left. And then that's destroyed by Shalmaneser V or Sargon II, depending on what text you read. Okay. Finally, as the Assyrians withdraw from the Holy Land, withdraw from the Levant, in the 2nd, 3rd quarter of the 7th century BC, King Josiah of Judah makes this attempt to control not only Judah and, again, the great reforms, religious reforms he instituted, but also destroy any kind of vestige of pagan worship in the northern kingdom. And Bethel was his target. And he, it says, destroyed, utterly destroyed this shrine, the altar, all of the surrounding whatever complex was there, and we'll again unpack that in a little while, killed the priests and burned their bones on the site, desecrating the entire thing. And so he made Bethel was like a, if you know modern Syrian history, Hafez Assad basically did this to Hama when they rebelled, absolutely leveled the whole entire place. Okay, and that's in 2 Kings 23. So that's, and of course, Bethel's history continues on. We'll touch on it, but this is kind of what we want to focus on for today's discussion, and we'll move on from there. Okay. All right. So we talked about 2 different names for Bethel, Bethel and Luz. Here's a picture of the site of Beitin during the 19th century. Incredible time where exploration of the Holy Land was still new. Archaeology really hadn't come onto its own yet, so it was kind of a blank canvas for researching. And you can see the barrenness of the land, the lack of trees, and that's significant, I think, as well. But a lot different now, but this is what it looked like back then. The name Luz, as far as I can tell in the lexicons, means almond tree. Apparently, it could have a religious connotation, but not sure about that. The idea of renaming sites or updating sites in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament is not uncommon, and I've listed some here. The site of Dan actually has 3 names. Laish was the Canaanite name, Lashem, and then Dan, when the tribe of Dan migrated up from the Sorek Valley and settled there. Hazazon Tamar is a name of another name for En-Gedi, and this was found in 2 Chronicles 20 when the Transjordanian alliance of Ammonites, Moabites, and the men of Mount Seir, Edomites, tried to attack Judah. And Kiryas Sefer, of course, is Debir, and Kiryat Arba, Hebron in the Old Testament. So, and there's others as well, Jebus, Jerusalem, which I mentioned here. So these are, again, updates, name changes that for various reasons took place. Okay. All right. The big thing here I want to point out is that in Joshua 6:2, I'll move my something here. You've got an interesting situation here. This is the border description between Ephraim and Benjamin. And so following the border, the writer Joshua says that basically says that Luz is a different location than Bethel. And we'll again unpack that more later. So this is the important thing that we want to talk about. Are they two locations or are they one? We'll see about that. Okay. So what's going on? We talked about the schism, the break between the northern and southern tribes. This was happened during this great big powwow, we would say in American lingo, American English lingo. Actually a conference or a meeting between all of the leaders of the 12 tribes and their king, Rehoboam, on the death of Solomon. And as you all remember, all know that Solomon had the Hebrew term mas oved, or corvée labor, and taxed and worked the population relentlessly to help build these great edifices and the temple and the palaces and fortifying his kingdom. And the people were very curious when Rehoboam came to power. Are you going to be like your father, or are you going to give us a break? And so he again came up to this big gathering at Shechem, which was an appropriate place. It was had its own history in the patriarchal narratives and conquest narratives. Of course, the famous Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, again, sits right between those two mountains. So it's front and center for those earlier speeches by Joshua. Anyway, so they meet there, and Rehoboam consults his advisors, and the older advisors say, no, give in. Solomon was too hard. You're going to have rebellion on your hands. The young advisor said, no, don't. You're going to show weakness. And so he chose the wrong route and basically insulted everybody, used a very rude euphemism in his answer after thinking on it for a while. And so that spurned this revolt. And to your tents, house of David, to your tents, O Israel, take care of yourself, house of David. And that was a split of the kingdom. So, and it's interesting. And I, again, as Aaron said, I work in Jordan, and Jordan is has a veneer, a surface where it's a first world type country. People dress in Western clothes. English is not widely spoken, not like in Israel, but quite a few people speak a little bit of English. They are very into, unfortunately, materialism and a lot of things that the West offers that aren't, in my opinion, good to emulate. But underneath that veneer, they are still, their identity is Bedouin tribe, or a Palestinian, or an Iraqi, or now most recently Syrian. And that is their identity. And if anything goes wrong, if anything's out of step, they don't necessarily go to the police or the mayor or national, members of their assembly. They go to the tribal elders, and that is where things are handled. And so, the whole monarchy, the whole Davidic monarchy, through David, Solomon, and beyond, was basically trying to keep 12 tribes happy and united. And that worked very well. Some of the time, not so well. Other times. If you guys read the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, you've got this beautiful poetry, very early Hebrew poetry, where it talks about some tribes came, some tribes didn't. Where are you for this tribe? We didn't find you. We didn't see you. And then, well, you were here, but where were you? And that's, again, a hint of tribalism that was very evident here. We think, this was a united nation. Well, it was, but they were united tribes. And this, again, as I mentioned in Jordan, throughout the Near East, you've got this to this day, sheikhs and tribal elders really have a lot of power. And again, King Abdullah II, the current monarch in Jordan, it knows this very well. His father was a master in controlling the tribes. They loved him, and Abdullah has struggled more than his father has. But anyway, enough modern analogies there. But so this is what happened. The northern tribes revolted. And so one of Jeroboam's, who was again he was an official in the Mas Oved in the north, so he was a public figure. He recognized the first thing I need to do is sever any kind of relationship with Judah, and that means religious connections with the Jerusalem temple. And again, this was real wise politics. He had to have a alternative to that, so his people would not make pilgrimages to Jerusalem and want to reconnect. And so he established not one, but two religious centers in his new kingdom. One to the very north at Dan, and then one at the very south, very strategically located. And he picked a very important site that had a religious history, it had a cultic history, and that was Bethel. He couldn't have picked a better site. And so these sites were, again, shrines were built at these sites, high places, altars, and this started, you said now, and so he told the population, you don't go to Jerusalem anymore. These are your sites to worship the Lord. Now, to the biblical writers,
Jeffrey,
this was an anathema.
Jeffrey, can you hear me?
And it was seen nothing more than a religious counterfeit. And the book of Chronicles, which again is a later, I would say, parallel text to Samuel and Kings, written in the Persian period to a different audience, highlighting different things, didn't even mention this. It was so against what chronicler believed, he was probably a Levite. He didn't even mention it. Didn't even acknowledge it.
Jeffrey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Something that just came up to my mind for a second. Jeroboam ran away to Egypt from I believe the Bible describes how was it King Solomon, or maybe
yes.
They tried to catch him, and he went down to Egypt. And then we read that he's coming back to Canaan, and when he becomes the king, he builds he brings two golden calves and puts them at Dan and Bethel. And he says to the Israelites, these are your guards that brought you out of Egypt. But it's interesting, I think, that now that I think about it, that he's coming out of Egypt and he's bringing this Egyptian influence of the golden calf and putting it in Dan and Bethel, and possibly being affected by Pharaoh and Egypt or Egyptian influence. It just came to mind.
Right, the Apis bowl, Egyptian Apis bowl. Yes, absolutely. We're going to, again, unpack that a little bit more. But another important thing that you bring up, Aaron, is that Jeroboam was, he was a guest at the court of Shishak, the first pharaoh of the 22nd dynasty, who later came up, and the Bible doesn't tell us. Bible says he came up and was paid off by Rehoboam, but on the temple at Karnak, one of the portals, Shishak has a whole wall of cartouches of the cities he conquered, and they're all northern kingdom cities. So this is interesting in that what went on that we don't hear about, that we don't know about, because he was buddy with Shishak, the Egyptian pharaoh, when he was in Egypt, and then Pharaoh turns around and attacks him. This could be it could have had a falling out, or it could be a stab in the back. Certainly a stab in the back, but exactly the details we don't know. Now, my boss here at Andrews University, Professor Randall Yonker, who runs the institute here, he just wrote an article suggesting that Shishak actually had two campaigns, one against Judah, one against Israel, and we won't get into that. But there's a there's a whole lot of interesting things going on here that we can speculate. Again, but we don't have time. So this is the text, very, very important. And I'll just read the highlighted portion. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And of course, we immediately think too of the golden calf that Aaron helped build at the base of Sinai. When Moses was getting the law. O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, and he set one at Bethel, and the other one he put in Dan. Okay. And so he did it in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made, and he placed in Bethel the priests of the high place that he had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, the month that he had devised from his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the people in Israel, went up to the altar to make offerings. So again, he is replacing the feast, the worship, the sacrifice that is going on in Jerusalem. He's replacing that with Bethel. And here's the 2 sites here. Not as nice of a map, but 2 sites there that show us Dan and Bethel, the 2 sites. Now let's look at the golden calf. Okay, what does this mean here? In Canaanite religion, we know this again from the Ugaritic tablets that were found starting in 1929 in Ugarit, a city way to the north in Syria, that opened a huge, literally a library of understanding of Canaanite religion. And what was mentioned in the Old Testament, El, Baal, Asherah, Ashtart, this was very much fleshed out, and we understood what the Canaanites believed in a much deeper way. Not only that, it helped us understand how to read scripture, especially some of the Psalms, because some of the Psalms that were written were polemics against Baal worship. And Baal is seen, again, just a crash course, and some of you may know this, but let's just take a minute or two talking about this. Baal came to life in the winter. We think winter is a time of, hibernation and everything shuts down. In Semitic thought, in Canaanite thought, the winter was a time of life. And so Baal was out riding around the clouds, throwing lightning bolts and causing rain, which brought life to crops, to the fields, to the wheat and barley and other grain crops that the Canaanites were growing. And so Baal would ride either, he would ride a bull, and he would be again throwing things and mating with Asherah, and everything would be would come to life. Okay, that's the winter. Well, how do you blend worship of Yahweh to all of your Baal worshipers? You have a bull without a rider. And so, again, geopolitically, this made great sense, what Jeroboam was doing. He erected these golden calves, and you worshiped an invisible God by the name of Yahweh that was sitting on that calf. You couldn't see him, but he was there. Now, if you were pagan and followed Canaanite religions, most likely everybody or most people were had blended the two, or certainly a large segment of the population. We see this so poignantly in the time of Elijah and Elisha a century later. But yeah, you would see an object of Canaanite worship sitting there. So you were fine, and those of you that worship the Lord would see your invisible God, or imagine your invisible God on that. And it made sense because Yahweh is an invisible God. You go into the Holy of Holies, you see the Ark of the Covenant, you see the chest there, but you don't see God. At least, how we would understand it to be. So this was more attractive to the population because part of God was at least they could see. Okay. He was somebody they could not just imagine, but they could see the bull that he rode on. And so this all was carefully orchestrated to, again, work and grudgingly appease everybody so they wouldn't go to Jerusalem. Okay. I just have Psalm 68 here. And again, this was possibly a takeoff from a Canaanite hymn, but it's a polemic, and they put Yahweh in there. O kingdoms of the earth, sing to God, sing praises to the Lord, to him who rides in the heavens. The ancient heavens, behold, he sends out his voice, his mighty voice, ascribe power to God, whose majesty is over Israel and whose power is in the skies. Well, wait a minute, Baal's in the sky, or I should say Baal. For so many years I said Baal, I continue to say Baal. That is, God is it, here. The psalmist is showing it. It's not Baal that rides in the skies. It's God. It's the Lord. Okay. So that just gives you hopefully a little indication on what was in Jeroboam's mind here. Now, what did it look like? I've got an excellent book here that I highly recommend everybody to buy by Rick Hess, Israelite Religions. And I borrowed the cover here to show you two very famous archaeological finds. The large one here is a cultic bull, a bronze bull found in the Sumerian Highlands, north of, I think, the city of Samaria, near Dothan. Anyway, by an Israeli, and Ami Mazar, Israeli archaeologist, excavated the site. It was an open-air cultic site, beautifully fashioned, beautifully crafted bull. Iron One site that was, again, had this worship going on there. And then another famous one is an earlier silver calf, plating still on it there, that was found at Ashkelon, just outside a huge Middle Bronze gateway into the city, which you can still walk through today. They've done a beautiful restoration job of it. Found in a little ceramic house, or little container that the bull was in. So that gives you some idea of what these two bronze or golden calves look like, rather, in Bethel and Dan. Okay, and so that was the 10th century or late 10th century situation, and this is when Bethel became a very important religious destination for the Northern Kingdom. But things changed, geopolitical landscapes change, and in the 8th century, Israel and Judah were working together. Jeroboam II, probably the most powerful Israelite king, the Jehu dynasty, no relation to Jeroboam I, except the name, and Uzziah, who was king in Judah, had pretty close relations and worked together. And it was in this arena, this context, that Amos again goes forth from Judah and makes his announcements, makes his oracles at Bethel. Now notice what Amaziah, the priest at Bethel, says to Amos: never prophesy at Bethel again, because it is the sanctuary of the king and the temple of the kingdom. So Bethel was the Northern Kingdom's Jerusalem temple. And that is from the mouth of the priest there. That is, again, preserved in the words in the prophecy of Amos. Very, very interesting. Okay. And because of that, we don't expect to find as lavish or large high place at Dan to the north as we would at Bethel. Keep that in mind. Okay. Just a few words about the modern discovery of Bethel. We're going to return to some of these points in just a minute. Really, the father of historical geographical research was Edward Robinson. He was a pastor, American pastor in New England, and he made two very long journeys in and around the Holy Land with his assistant, Eli Smith, which is the man pictured to the right with his wife. And Edward Robinson was very, very astute biblicist and Hebrew scholar. Eli Smith was a missionary living in Lebanon and fully conversant and fluent in Arabic. And so what they did is they went around back and forth across, crisscrossing the Holy Land, trying to find where ancient sites were. Okay. And what they would do, and they found this work time and time again, is that in many cases, the Arabic name for an ancient site preserved the much more ancient Semitic or Hebrew name after all this time, especially if it was occupied pretty much more or less, you know, consecutively or throughout that time. If it was abandoned for a long time, then the place name may be forgotten. But he was especially, Robinson was especially brilliant north of Jerusalem. And if you remember from the Bible, in the central Benjamin Plateau, there are 3 sites that have the same root, Arabic or Hebrew root: Gibeon, Gibeah, and Geba. And he recognized at least 2 of those sites, I think, had the name, preserved the name Tel El-Ful, literally hill of beans. Most scholars believe is Gibeah, which did not, again, preserve the name, but the others 2 did. The other 2 sites, I think, did. And so like Gibeon was El Jib. G in Arabic is pronounced J. But brilliant. And they came along and saw Beitin in the distance from the road. And they recognized that Beitin was a corruption, Arabic corruption of the word Bethel. And since that observation, that has been the view of the majority of scholars to this day, that Beitin, very small Palestinian village or Arab village at that time, much larger today, is the site of ancient Bethel. At least it preserves the name. Okay, all right. And I've got Albrecht out here, a German scholar. He said, in Robinson's footnotes were forever buried the errors of many generations. I mean, there was so much ecclesiastical tradition and hocus pocus going on. And what Robinson and Smith did was they kind of cleared that up and were able to scientifically show that name preservation, they weren't archaeologists, that hadn't come around yet, but name preservation was a wonderful way to recognize biblical sites. And you can see the dates there, mid-1800s, a long time ago. They were followed by the Royal Engineers, British Army Royal Engineers, that were hired by the Palestine Exploration Fund in London to do a monumental topographical survey. And this took place, you can see from the dates 1872 to 1877. And that came out to a multi-volume survey of Western Palestine. And the map to the right here shows our site. And 1 inch equals 1 mile. And I don't know if you can see Beitin here. And then you've got right here is a monument to a sheikh, and that will become important here in a minute as well. But very, very important, and still referenced today. The 2 Royal Engineers that ran that was Claude Renier Condor, and these guys are heroes to biblical scholars because they were able to do so much. And a lot of, you have to remember that a lot of these place names are now lost, but they were able to interview older sheikhs and village elders and who remembered names, and they wrote those down, and was just gave us a huge body of work that we still treasure today. By the way, Condor, just a little side here, Condor was one of the suspects for Jack the Ripper. People thought he might have been Jack the Ripper later in his life. I don't think many people think that anymore, but he was on the suspect list for a while. Herbert Kitchener was his other half, and he actually became Lord Kitchener later on. He was running World War I from Whitehall and drowned when his ship hit a mine, northern Scotland, and lost almost all on board. But quite a distinguished history with him. And he also has some skeletons in the closet, which we won't mention. But anyway, those were the two men that did the survey of Western Palestine. And then in the 20th century, French Dominican monk Felix Abel and William F. Albright, American biblical scholar and archaeologist, again confirmed Robinson's conclusions. Okay, Beitine equals Bethel. That's very important. Now, by this time, archaeology is becoming a very popular discipline, and Melvin Grove Kyle, who taught at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, what became Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, very conservative, staunch Christian, and he wanted to, and he had financial backing to do some excavations in the Holy Land. And so he paid for an expedition that he and Professor Albright from the last slide did, and they researched the Dead Sea Plain, trying to find Sodom and Gomorrah, which they may have actually done if Baba Dra is indeed biblical Sodom. And then he wanted to excavate, and he excavated with Albright at Tel Beit Mirsem, which they believed was Kiryat Sefer or Debir, which today we're almost certain it was not. But he died in 1933, and his successor at the seminary was James Kelso. And Kelso wanted to continue on Kyle's work, and so they decided to excavate at Bethel and called that excavation the Kyle Memorial Excavations. Okay, and so that's what the excavation at Bethel was called. And it was led initially by Albright here and James Kelso. And again, very well funded by Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And again, not to go down another rabbit trail, Pittsburgh Theological Seminary has been doing archaeology for years. The last archaeologist just retired from Pittsburgh Seminary, Ron Tappy. They will not replace him, and they are shutting down the program. And that's a kind of a pause to be sad and sorrowful, because that has a huge, very long tradition. But that's kind of the trend now, is fewer and fewer schools, seminaries, are actually doing archaeology. And again, sad to say, Pittsburgh, apparently, from what I hear a pretty good source, has joined that rank of Southwestern Baptist, Southern Baptist. They all shut down. And sad to say, but anyway, at this time it was a powerhouse. And so Albright, who was absolutely brilliant scholar, I think everybody would agree with that, truly a genius, had control over so many different aspects. He had control over the entire bailiwick of the Near East. I don't know, scores and scores of languages he read and deciphered, and was a master in archaeology, pottery, typology, everything. But he worked with Kelso for the first year in 1934. Kelso returned in 54, 57, and 1960 by himself and excavated there. Kelso here is in front of Cave 1, Qumran, and this is a whole group of old guys. Albright's here. I don't know if you can see my pointer. And second one on the right, and I think that's Kyle, and then Kelso is the center figure there. And so again, Bethel was chosen. They dug at Bethel, but you have an Arab village on top of the mound. So not the entire mound was available. They had to rent plots that had open ground and excavate those. Now, there was a 4-acre plot in the northwest sector, which is interesting. And so most of the work was done there. Okay, this is what they found. I won't go into detail because of more modern critiques of their excavation and kind of the poor methodology that was used there. They found Chalcolithic, Middle Bronze, Late Bronze, and iron, and later sherds. So it had a continuous occupation. Why? Because of the spring. Whenever you have a water source, you're going to have people there. And so Bethel was occupied, not continuously, but more or less on a consistent basis throughout antiquity. You can see they found in the Middle Bronze, or what they call the Middle Bronze period, they found a temple and flagstone pavement, massive 3.5 meter wide wall. Late Bronze with two phases and a destruction phase, which they attributed to the Israelites. Beautiful patrician houses, drainage and sewer systems, olive oil press, and so on. Iron One, which would have been our first Israelite village, perhaps was very poorly built. We see that at the site that we're currently excavating. We're excavating an Iron One Israelite town that was settled by the tribe of Gad, and they sure picked the right location, beautiful views, but poor workmanship. And they were just trying to get four walls and a roof up to live their lives. Nothing fancy about it. Iron Two, they found again evidence of occupation. They did not find any evidence of the shrine of Jeroboam. And these men were very, very conscious of that shrine. They knew their Bible inside and out. They did not find any hint of it. If they would have, they would have said. A small village in the Persian period, and again, some of the people of Bethel came back from captivity, settled there. Hellenistic and Roman Byzantine was a huge town, very large, flourishing town, and then later occupation in the early Islamic and Mamluk periods, and then reoccupation in the late Ottoman period in the 19th century, and that continues today. Okay. The only other group that is excavated at Bethel, and I'm probably missing some IAA digs, but this Japanese Palestinian group, joint group, worked there at the site from 2011 to 2013. And it's a small world, everybody, because I attend a church, and one of the church members is a Japanese American, and he was all excited, came tell me, he said, my seminary is going to excavate Bethel. And I said, man, that hasn't been excavated since the 1960s. Is he sure it's Bethel? Beitine in West Bank? Yeah. Well, he was part of this. And Japanese university that partnered with the Palestinian University of Birzeit. And they are doing mostly cultural heritage. They did find excavated some MB and Roman tombs, south side of the site. Okay. Now, everything was fine and everything looked great until 1970 regarding Beitine as the site of ancient Bethel. And an article came out in a kind of a second-tier journal, Westminster Theological Journal, and in it, the author suggested that El Bira, which is just south of Beitine, should be the site of biblical Bethel instead of Beitine. Now, there is a backstory to this, and I'm not going to argue the validity of the argument, but the issue stemmed from the site of Ai. And the site of Ai has been excavated several times, first by John Garstang and then by an Israeli or a Jewish archaeologist, and then later on by Joe Calloway from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in the 1960s and early 70s. And the problem with Ai was they could not find any evidence of the site being occupied during the late Bronze period, the time of the conquest. And that creates a problem because, again, Joshua, 6-8, certainly Joshua 8, I can't remember the span of chapters there, has a very detailed account of the capture, destruction of Ai. And you would think that there would be evidence of that. And Calloway and Krause, the earlier archaeologist, could not find anything. And so Calloway, who was a very strong Baptist, came out with a pretty controversial conclusion and said, well, archaeology proves the Bible is wrong. This is probably a belief or done for theological purposes, but in reality, it didn't happen. And he was a very respected archaeologist. He actually passed away when I was living in Israel, and my Israeli professor started out his lecture saying, I have to have some sad news. Professor Calloway passed away. And years later, I talked with Calloway's daughter and told her that, this very distinguished Israeli professor actually stopped class and told about your dad's passing, and tears came to her eyes. And so he was a believer, but he saw archaeology as actually going against the Bible here. I think he jumped to that conclusion too quickly. And the writer of this article in 1970, David Livingstone, thought that, okay, if I, or etel, the site of I, is the actual site of I, we got a problem. So he argued that I is a different site, Khirbet Nisa, which has some Middle Bronze occupational level. And that debate continues on today. Is I etel, is it Khirbet Nisa, or is it Khirbet Makatir, or some other site? The problem with this is, forget the validity of the arguments. The problem with it is that it's trying to solve a potential problem. And in archaeology, that's dangerous ground. You have to look at the data that you collect from a site, and that's the data. And when you start interpreting it, and this is all sides are guilty on this. You start interpreting that and shaping it to your narrative that you think is true, whether you're a minimalist or a very strong Bible-believing Christian, you're going to run into problems, because archaeology changes. New finds are found that rewrite the textbooks. And so anyway, Rainey, well, we'll talk about Rainey in a minute, but Livingstone wrote this article, and he thought that, okay, if I can't be, if the site of I can't be etel, then it's got to be a different site, and Beitin can't be Bethel. And so there's a site to the south of Bethel, El Bira. And so he suggested that, and he argued, made a bunch of arguments. Now, that was, it's a picture of David Livingstone there, and he actually graduated from Andrews University, where I'm sitting today, 1988, and he wrote up the final report. That was his dissertation of this site that he thought was I. This created a sharp response. Sharp is too kind a word, by Anson Rainey, who was an Israeli historical geographer, probably the greatest historical geographer, most respected of the previous generation. Passed away in 2011. Now, a little bit of I have to explain here too that I'm a student of Anson Rainey's. He was my professor in Israel, and I don't agree with everything Anson Rainey, all of his positions and all of his interpretations, but I do this one. And he took Livingstone's arguments and said, look, you took a class from me in historical geography in 1966, and you didn't bring up your arguments, and this is why I think you're wrong. And he, again, had a very scathing rebuttal of Livingstone's arguments. And part of it was based on the fact that you are doing this because you're trying to solve a biblical problem, potential biblical problem. Okay. And so this dialogue, that's another kind word, went on until Rainey passed away. His last article on Beitin equals Bethel was published in 2006. And they both are passed away now. But this was a long-standing disagreement. And I know a lot of people, a lot of well-meaning Christians still believe that Makatir or Nisia are better candidates than etel. Okay. But anyway, so that goes on. But for this purpose of this discussion, we're going to believe or hold that Beitin is actually preserves the ancient site of Bethel. Okay. Now, since Kelso and his excavation team could not find the slightest evidence of this massive temple, we use a Greek word temenos, or sacred precinct, okay, temple complex. What about Dan? Well, the news at Dan is a lot better. And I don't know if you've had your lecture on Dan yet, but Dan, they did find a fairly well-preserved temenos, or sacred precinct, interestingly enough, at the northwest edge of the site of Dan, facing north, which is significant too, because you're facing towards Baal Zephon, the Baal god of the north, and not east, or not west, rather, like the temple faces. Okay. Anyway, Avraham Biran, who was an Israeli IAA archaeologist, started excavating the site in 1966. So right on the border with Syria, before the 6-Day War, and the Israeli soldiers were digging trenches and messing up this ancient site. And so the IAA said, get up there and take control of this, and do this properly. And so Biran did that and continued to do it until he died at 99 years old. And he was long time head of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion Archaeological Institute in Jerusalem, and excavated for many years. And he's been followed by David Elan, who took his spot after his death, and David Elan is publishing. However, the final publication for the Iron 2 period at Dan has not appeared yet. It should be appearing hopefully soon. Iron 1 volume just came out. But this is what he found. You can see a stainless steel reconstructed skeleton of the altar, where the altar would have sat, and then the steps up to the shrine itself. And some of the outer buildings here, part of the temenos, perhaps supply rooms, priest quarters, whatever. But this is a very impressive structure, or series of structures, with beautifully hewn ashlar walls. These are more podiums or pedestal or platforms than superstructure, but they're there. Okay. What does it look like? Well, here's, forgive my stealing of Lean Rittmeyer's model here, but he's probably the best archaeological architect alive today. Did fantastic work finding the location of the Solomon's and Herod's temple, and he has given us an idea of what this looked like in antiquity. Now, this is probably what the Bethel temple looked like, only much more lavish, perhaps large. You have the golden calf here. That probably would have been farther in, towards the back of the sanctuary. Notice you've got what they call a Migdal temple or tower temple here, which is 2-story. This is a Canaanite tradition, and we know these from several sites, including Shechem, which they found in a Middle Bronze and Late Bronze tower temple. And of course, this figures into the story of Abimelech, the son of Gideon, in Judges chapter 8 or 9. Anyway, so you've got these stairs going up, and then you worship Yahweh, who is sitting upon this bull inside of this temple, and you sacrifice the pre-sacrifice at the altar here. Okay. So, anyway, that is probably the best reconstruction of what the Bethel temple would have looked like, only think bigger and more lavish, much more lavish. And that's at Dan. It's very impressive at Dan, probably much more impressive at Bethel. Okay. Now, I want to talk about this guy, kind of an unsung hero of our account. Zev Vilnay was a long-term Israeli guide. And he would, for many immigrants that came to Israel not knowing Hebrew, not knowing anything about their heritage, they would meet people like Zev Vilnay, and he would take them by the hand literally and lead them through the land. And he led what these are called in Hebrew, Yediat Haaretz, or knowledge of the land tours. And if you were an immigrant, this was one of the most important things that happened when you first came to the land of Israel. You were given a very intensive tour, not just in buses, but hiking. So you're one with the land, because this is your land. This is your heritage. This is your roots. And Vilnay was a master at this. He actually did his PhD in England, I think, at University of London. Dropsy University in Philadelphia. He did it in the States here. And he did this for years. And when I first moved to Israel, I bought his small little packet or little book, fat but small Israel guide, just packed with information. And he had been publishing this since the 1930s. And you can see an early version there, Palestine Guide, a pre-state publication from the 1930s or early 40s. He published just a tremendous amount of works on Israel and its land. And unfortunately, I never met him. He passed away actually the year I went to Israel as a student, but would have loved to have met him. He celebrated, there's a chair in his name at Kinneret College up next to Sea of Galilee. And he is one of the historical geographical giants in modern Israeli history. And anyway, all that to say, in 1980, he was visiting Beth El, or Beit El, the Israeli settlement just north of Beitin. And on the eastern part of that area, of that where the settlement exists, is a hill. We would call it a hill in Semitic term. It's a jebel or a har, I guess, in Hebrew. And he walked up there and said, here is where not only Jeroboam, or excuse me, where Jacob had his dream, but this is probably where Jeroboam built his temple. And he was pointing out different things, and we'll look at that in a minute here. But I think he's got a lot to his arguments have a lot of validity here. Okay, here's a picture of the summit of Mount Aratas. Now that's pronounced different ways, but that's the way I saw it. And a big thanks to Bible Walks, Todd Bolin, for these pictures of the site, because he took these wonderful pictures. And that's looking north. And this is again on top of this mountain or hill. And you can see the limestone, the bedrock here is flattened. And that's usually not natural. It's usually done by human agents. And that Villeneuve believes is part of the courtyard of the temple. Okay, part of the Jeroboam's temple. And anyway, it fits for many reasons, and we'll list these in a minute. But the site, you can see both the Mediterranean, the Jordan Valley, and Transjordan from the site. And this fits, again, the patriarchal narrative, especially Abraham and Lot. Could have been in discussion here about who goes where. And it's only about, I think it's a kilometer or two north of Beitin. So it's close, not at the actual site. But interesting to note too that, which we mentioned before, when Josiah came up here and totally destroyed this temple, he and burned the bones of the priests. He well, for one thing, there would be very little left. We wouldn't expect to find that. But he didn't, it says nothing about destroying the town. It just the temple precinct. So you could argue that that may have been hinting at that this is a different, outside of the city. But anyway, that's one argument. Okay. Here, these signs again are showing in both modern Hebrew and English this as the ruins of Jeroboam's temple. Now, next to this, and I don't have a picture of it here, I lost it, but there is a ruined Muslim shrine or house of prayer, makam, a prayer house, and a Byzantine chapel. So you've got it's recognized as some sort of religious site by Muslims and Byzantine Christians as well. Okay. Not only that, you've got a very ancient oak tree here. I read 1,000 years old. That's very old. But again, trees are religious symbols, and this is on top of a hill. You've got the term Asherah pole. Is it a tree or is it literally a pole? That's debated, but that says something about that. Now, those of you that have studied modern Israeli history recognize the tragic story of Gush Etzion. There was a block of 4 settlements south of Bethlehem that held out for quite some time against incursions and attacks, and finally fell the day before Israel became a nation, became a state, 1948. And their children would stand on a hilltop outside of Jerusalem, and way in the distance, as they looked south, they could see one lone oak tree atop a hill. And their parents would say to them, they would say, "There's home. That's where our home is." And they did this for 19 years. After the 6-Day War, they restarted or moved back and rebuilt the settlements. And that oak tree still exists as well. So trees have religious significance in the Holy Land, and I think that's significant that it's that old. Here's an aerial view of the site: Crusader Chapel, Muslim prayer place or prayer niche. Possibly the rock where, again, this is conjectural, the temple here, and then a tower and some tombs, which we'll talk about here in the next photo. This is actually a Jewish Second Temple period tomb from the New Testament period. So the fact that Jews were buried there, again, gives it some credence for a site of historical significance. Again, this is not right at Beitin. It's a hilltop about a kilometer or 2 to the north. And I think this is probably the best candidate for the site of Jeroboam's temenos or shrine. Okay, you've got a wall surrounding 200 by 100 meters surrounding the site. Again, clearly modern, but possibly rebuilt from an more ancient wall. And that's roughly, I think, the size of the tabernacle, Mishkan. So interesting in that respect. Now, you see this mound here and here. Is that ruins of the altar? Or is it ruins of Jeroboam's temple? Again, it has not been excavated. And I think that's one of the most important things that could be done to clarify matters is to do some very intensive surveys of this hilltop site and maybe some probes and see what is found. But they've done some picking up surface sherds at a wall, kind of a perimeter wall, and a tower, which I don't have shown here, and that they have found iron 2A sherds. So that's very promising. So I leave you kind of with the question: is this Jeroboam's temple that is so talked about in the Book of Kings? I think it's the best candidate, and certainly that can change. But I think it's worthy of further exploration.
I just want to add one thing. You mentioned graves in the site, and indeed, it's not just 1 or 2 or 3 tombs from the Second Temple period. It's actually the hill is actually a necropolis. There are a few dozens of family tombs from the Second Temple period and the First Temple period. And it's interesting to see in the story of Josiah, when he comes to desecrate Bethel, it says when Josiah set eyes on the graves which were there on the hill, he sent and took the bones from them and burned them on the altar to desecrate it. In other words, the Bible says very clearly that there is a cemetery near that site, and that Josiah took the bones to desecrate the holy place. So this also strengthens.
Excellent. Yeah, so here's kind of in sum here, kind of what we're saying here. So it is a holy site, displays elements from all 3 monotheistic religions. And you've got rock cut tombs from the Second Temple or New Testament period, as well as the First Temple period. And how we can tell the difference there is the style of tomb. The First Temple period tombs tend to, at least the iron 2 age tombs, tend to mimic the 4-room house and small rock cut tombs. And so that's often a dead giveaway of the dating, even if the tomb is emptied and there's no pottery or finds to go with it. Okay. We talked about the commanding views, the actual height of the site. Now we go back to Bethel and Luz, and we're going to do a little Hebrew exegesis here, guys. This is, this is the text from Joshua 16:2. And this is a vav here, conjunction, and it went out. Okay, yatzah is to leave or go out. It went out or extended from Beit El. Okay, then you have the next word, which is critical, Luzah. Luz is the secondary site or the other site, the other name for Bethel. The Kametz Hay here is called a directional hay. When you have that last letter on the end there, that means towards that place. So it's difficult to argue that these are contemporary or these are the same site from this text. It seems to be two different sites. So does that mean that Luz and Bet El are from at this period in the settlement? Are they two different sites? And that would fit because Luz could be the site of Beitin, Beit El could be that mountain. Okay, so just a thought, but there is textual evidence there that you see here in the Hebrew. Aaron, any comments on that?
There is. Are you going to touch the testimony of the Pilgrim of Bordeaux?
Yeah, this was. Yeah, I didn't discuss early Christian pilgrimage, but yeah, the site of Beitin is mentioned, or Bethel is mentioned in the itinerary of the Pilgrim of Bordeaux. More importantly, it's mentioned in Eusebius in the Onomasticon. And Eusebius, of course, was a very famous early church historian that lived in the 4th century, lived in Caesarea. And he wrote basically a guidebook that described where all the biblical sites were. And there were so many Roman miles from this site. You turn right here and there it is. And that onomasticon has been preserved and just recently was translated into English. Before a few years ago, it was available in German and in modern Hebrew, but it is now available in English. And Stephen Notley is coming out with a more critical English translation of it through Brill. I don't know if it's out yet, but Eusebius is our best reference, and again Jerome as well after him, for placing Beth El at Beitin.
I would just want to add that in the Pilgrim of Bordeaux's diary, what's interesting is that when he describes how he comes to Beth El, and when he arrives there, the people living there at that time say this is Beth El, but the place where Jacob dreamed of the ladder and where Jeroboam built his temple is a mile away. And
my word.
So that's a clear. And now I asked a Bible scholar in Ofra, where I live, Professor Yoel Elitzur, what does that mean? So he said a mile away doesn't mean measure a mile and you'll get there. A mile away means it's out there. It's not. Yeah. It's not part of the settlement. So this is another thing that strengthens the idea that the cultic site is actually outside of Beth El, the town.
Fantastic point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Well, I'd like to hear from those of you, and we can discuss aspects of this if anybody has any questions or comments or observations.
Okay. So first of all, if you can stop sharing your screen, and so we can have a Q&A session, a debate, and wonderful. Okay, everyone. So we're opening the mics for questions and answers about Bet El. And I just want to say two things very quickly because I'm sure you have some of you have questions. One thing is that Dr. Jeffrey mentioned the fact that there are many names that repeat themselves in different places in Israel. And just like we have an Arab village called Bitin, there is another Arab village not far away, about maybe a half an hour away, that is called Bitilu. So we have Bitin and we have Bitilu. And the identification of Bitilu is also interesting because, Dr. Jeffrey mentioned Deborah and the song of Deborah. So the Bible says that Deborah sat at the tree of the date tree between Bet El and
Ramah.
Ramah. And but it says it's Bet El Ephraim. And so Professor Elitzur thinks that Bitilu is Bethel of Ephraim, and Bitin is Bethel of Benjamin. So that's just one thing that I wanted to mention. And the second thing is that I think that I spoke last time about how Jerusalem overshadows all the other important spiritual and cultic sites, Israelite sites. And so I think if you take Jerusalem away, then Shiloh definitely takes the next position at shadowing everybody else. And I think that in that sense, Bet El kind of got pushed to the side. And I think that your presentation was very good in the sense that it showed how important Bet El was, how central it was to the Israelites because of the patriarchs' stories, and later on that the tabernacle was there. So definitely Bethel is important. One of my questions, one of my mysteries is, how do you settle the chronology between Shiloh and Bethel when, on the one hand, Joshua erects the Mishkan, erects the tabernacle in Shiloh, and then in the book of Judges, there is no mention of, at least at the story of the concubine, of the tabernacle being in Shiloh. Rather, it's at Bethel. And the only mention of Shiloh in the story of the concubine is in the context of the Israelites, rather the Benjaminites kidnapping the girls dancing in the vineyards of Shiloh. But there's no reference to the tabernacle. And so one of the things I struggle with is, what exactly was first? Was it the tabernacle in Shiloh? Was it the tabernacle in Bethel? Did they swap?
Yeah, good question. It's fluid, and I think we see these texts are snapshots, and they're photos of what things at a certain period of time, but we don't have the video. And that, I studied under, I don't know if you ever met Gabi Barkai. And Gabi Barkai would always tell us, he said, archaeology, the questions remain the same, the answers always change. And I'll never forget that, because things will change with new discoveries. But in this case, where you have a text that does mention it at Bethel, and then at Shiloh, how did this, we don't have context. We don't know, the progression, what happened and when. And that's always frustrating.
Everyone, please feel free to ask questions.
Dr. Hudon, I have a question. In your next to the last slide, you showed the mound that seems like it's a little distance anyway. Earlier, you had said that the flat area was, I think, possibly, I don't know if I'm correct, you said that was possibly where Jeroboam's temple was, and or where the tabernacle stood. And it seems like this mound is quite a bit a ways away.
Yeah.
So how would the two work together? Would one be Jeroboam's temple and the other the tabernacle, or how did that work? I didn't quite get that.
Boy, that's a good question, and that's one I wonder myself. Again, it needs to be carefully, systematically surveyed, and probes need to be dug and to see what that mound is. It's probably an ancient building. Is it connected with Jeroboam's temple? Probably. In what way? We don't know. And that's where excavation is going to help us. But I think, and Aaron probably can share more than I can here, but I think we're looking at something that initially was much more grandiose and much larger in some respects, the whole complex, than the one at Dan. Now, archaeology has limitations, and we know that Josiah destroyed everything. And I think in Jerusalem, a good parallel from Jerusalem is the Seleucid Acra, this fortress that the Maccabees or the Hasmoneans took over. And every archaeologist working in Second Temple period remains in Jerusalem looks for the Acra, because we don't know where it is. There's been different theories, and people said they found it, but the historical sources say that fortress is completely disassembled, and I hesitate to say this, but I think like the bedrock was shaved. I mean, they wanted to eradicate that totally. So it's very likely nothing exists of it. But who knows? That could be hyperbole.
This isn't directly about Bethel, but you made a statement that the east-west roads are rare and that Jerusalem didn't have an east-west access. But what about the famous Sha'ar al-Gay or Bab el-Wad? I thought that was the access to Jerusalem.
Yeah, there was one coming up the Elah Valley, but that was not. And again, you have to be careful not to impose modern history with biblical history. Obviously, the path of least resistance were used as roads, and there's a Tybee Ridge, but the Beit Horon Ridge route comes up from the Ayalon Valley. That was the main route to the coast from Jerusalem, and upper and lower Beit Horon, and then up to Ramah, and then it turned south and went to Jerusalem. There was no direct route. Aaron, somebody else can maybe add as far as when Bab el-Wad, that the old Jerusalem highway was built, but I think that is much more modern. I don't have a date on that though. But
Okay, one
question.
more question before we end. Okay, I think we are done. I'm just going to try to do something just to brag. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes. There's our site.
It's just to let you guys enjoy a bit of the land of Israel with my drone. So this is the plateau that
Beautiful.
we're talking about. You could see the mountains of Ephraim. This is the tomb of the Arab sheikh. This is the monument that might be the temple of Jeroboam. Sorry for these are the first drone footage that I took when I began taking videos with my drone in 2016, I believe. But So it's a bit shaky.
Fantastic footage, Aaron. Oh, I love this.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is it.
Mitsuyan.
Say again?
Mitsuyan.
Metsuyan. Yeah. So this is just to end this great session. I want to thank everyone for participating, and I hope you all enjoyed this session. And just want to say one word before we finish about the amazing discovery that was made, that was proclaimed last week, the Ibal inscription that was found on Mount Ibal, an amazing inscription. And hopefully this coming Sunday, we will have a lecture about Tel Dan, just to finish the series of the cultic sites, the Israelite cultic sites. And we're also going to have a session with Dr. Scott Stripling and Dr. Peter, the philologist that deciphered the inscription. And we're going to have a Q&A session with them about the Ibal inscription. So I'm going to give you more details about that on the weekly newsletter that we send. So thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey Hudon, and looking forward for many more online courses with you. And I hope you also enjoyed teaching us about Bethel.
Very much so. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much, and shalom, everyone. Thank you for participating.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.